morning, everyone. Welcome to our latest edition of Charity Chats. Bear with us. I have a distinct feeling this one's going to be slightly off-piste and nobody quite knows what's going to happen. I blame myself entirely as being the chair today. So my name is Catherine Rustomji. I head the charities practice at Shakespeare Martineau. I'm joined by my able and very measured guest speakers, Charles Mesquita from Quilter Cheviot and James Saunders from Kingston. We've seen a few different items in the press this week, so particularly I wanted to start with the context of this being Small Charity Week, and I suppose exploring the theme of is bigger best, is small beautiful, what's happening. But I think in particular what jumped out to us was the headline in relation to Small Charities Week, immediately going to the doom and gloom, another on the brink of doom, failure, closure of many charities. The statistic that was given was that 96% of the UK's charities are small charities, but they receive only 17% of the sector's funding. And a study by Lloyds Bank Foundation had found that many of these charities say that they are on the brink of closure. So James, I'll come to you first, but I do wonder whether it's indicative of what you're seeing with clients and in the sector. I know it's something we've talked about before, but just what your reactions are to that particular story.
Yeah, I don't think it's surprising. As you say, Catherine, we have talked about this before. And I think we always felt that this period now was going to be the challenging one, given the pandemic and the support that was initiated and received during that period and immediately afterwards. This now is where the money is going to be much tighter. Things are going to be, the drawbridges are going to be brought up. We've always thought that probably philanthropy was going to be the source that was most open to supporting the sector now, given that government is going to be, as I say, drawing up the bridges and reducing the support. So the private philanthropy, but we've also spoken in the past about this relatively new idea of corporate philanthropy, what used to be called CSR, or is a variance of CSR, corporate philanthropy at the moment, in several guises. That's businesses having a foundation, a charity, their own charity to match fund and to spend according to employees' wishes, that sort of thing. And there's also the individual, money that needs to, or that is being spent in partnership with charities. They're the two areas, I suppose, that we're really looking to see come into the sector much more these next few months, few years maybe, as the funding is tighter. And of course, the flip side is that the charities need to be able to present themselves to those sorts of funders and show the value of partnering with us, rather than that old-fashioned, well, this is where your money goes. This is the good we do. There has to be something reciprocal. So that really, I think, is probably supports what we've been saying for the last couple of years.
Yeah. And it's interesting, isn't it, Charles? I think another article that caught my eye was the use of the term. It was saying that the third sector has a rather infantilized relationship with the government, and that charities approach the government with their hands out rather than demonstrating their worth. And I suppose, that picks up some of the comments that James just mentioned. But, Charles, your thoughts and observations on that?
Yeah, I mean, the problem is, and this isn't just for the charity sector, is it? It's you only have to listen to the Today programme, and it's everybody seems to be complaining but never coming up with any solutions. And actually, I think that would be a really poor reflection on small charities, which I believe are defined as charities that have got income of less than £50,000. And I think the number they had was 156,000 out of the 166,000 on the register. So they are an incredibly important, and actually from my experience, and I'm sure from your experiences, you find these organizations, particularly the small ones, run by volunteers, are really dynamic and actually very good at adjusting to change. I think there's more, which is we're not hearing about, is actually the squeezed middle. So it does feel like, and I'm not a fundraiser, but the larger charities are taking a bigger slice of the pie, and the medium-sized ones are the ones where I think it is really, really tough. for a number of reasons. One is sort of on the recruitment of employees and everything else. But, you know, I think we should be celebrating actually the amazing work most of these small charities do, some with no staff at all. And actually, the only thing I would say, only because I take my dog for a walk, virtually, well, not quite daily, but across our village hall and playing fields. And at no point do they actually advertise that they're a charity. And I suspect, you know, 90% of the village actually thinks it's something supplied by the local authority, which it isn't, and which is not funded by the local authority. So, you know, I think we should spend more time celebrating what the sector does, and actually keep pointing out to people actually the huge benefit society has as a result of it.
Yeah, I think that's where the real weakness comes in as well, that you know, the commentary that if charities weren't there, who would be providing these services? But I think at the moment, the general public doesn't really understand what the loss would be, because they don't appreciate what the value is of the contribution of charities. And I do wonder partly as well if that's more a role for the Charity Commission, that as the regulator of charities, shouldn't they be representing charities and demonstrating the worth that they bring, rather than at the moment, I think from the Charity Commission, I mean, rightly so, but we see a lot of publicity around charities that have got things wrong, where there's been fraud or abuse or misapplication of funds. But I do wonder if that can give the wrong impression of charities, that everybody in there is not quite doing things properly. So rather than focusing on the negative, I wonder whether the Commission should lead with more of a positive role. James, would you agree? Oh, Charles, yeah.
Well, no, I was just, because in fact we had the chair of the Charity Commission in to meet a number of trustees a couple of weeks ago. And it was very interesting because he, Orlando Fraser, has certainly been making a lot of comment about encouraging the wealthier to give more, and making a comparison between the UK and North America and Australia and the differences in. And partly that's a welfare state. But one of the comments of one of the trustees sitting around the table, which I thought was particularly interesting, is that if you, and I've lived in the US and is absolutely right, if in the US you give money to a charity, you actually are looking for successful organizations that you can attach yourself to and take that sort of credit for that. And there's a huge amount of pride in that. Where here in the UK, we're a bit sort of, we want everything run on a shoestring. We want everything having difficulty in everything. And we're coming in charging in a sort of, I suppose, slightly Victorian way to sort it out, whether it's money or volunteering or whatever. And perhaps we should change that mindset and actually really celebrate the success of these organizations and be proud and use it as a badge of honor that actually we are supporting things that are successful, rather than sort of helping people from the brink of. And I don't know quite how you change that mindset, but it did get me thinking that there is a very different mindset both sides of the Atlantic, and I accept that welfare states are different, but you know, but perhaps that's what the Commission could do in communicating. And the other thing I would just say on the communication point is, we seem to focus on the negatives, but it's not proportioned to the amount of wrong that is done. So it's relatively de minimis. And perhaps you're right, perhaps that we should shift it round and make that clear.
Yeah. James, what do you think?
I think this week, actually, as you know, the Charity Commission has published its next priorities for the upcoming year. There's 4 of them, and I think we've talked about them already off air, if you like. The first 2 are pretty straightforward. They're about regulation and support and intervention. The last one is about investing in people and organisations. The third one is the interesting one, and it relates to what we've been talking here, which is, and the phrase was, we will improve how we use our voice later on to help charity deliver impact. That, I think, is what we're talking about here. And I don't think we would be in disagreement if someone said the Charity Commission hasn't been doing enough of that. Yeah. It hasn't been supporting and celebrating and promoting the charity sector. And I think the question is, who does do that? And I suspect the answer really is the charity sector itself is the only one that helps itself on this to a limited extent, and not to any great extent, but you'll often find charities reciprocally saying, you know, well done to another charity on LinkedIn and those sort of things. But it's certainly not the media. I mean, look at the reporting of Andy Haldane's interview. The headlines were all about using that word infantile the headlines were negative, even though the content of the interview and speech I thought was generally much more positive. It was talking about all the good stuff that does go on, and avoiding the handout mentality. But the spin on the interview, it seems to me from the reporting, is more about, you know, picking up on the negatives. So it's not. I don't think it's the media doesn't really help the charity sector. MPs certainly don't. They make far more headlines criticising the RNLL. Was back in the news again this week. Actually, as we said before, they got very good publicity out of Mr. Farage's intervention from a couple of years ago. But so really, that's celebrating. Absolutely, to hear that the Charity Commission might be a bit more positive about things. Brilliant, because it's not happening at the moment, except within and from the charity sector itself.
I think it's interesting, that use of data and intelligence, but also what we're seeing is the importance of language. And one of the other points the Commission said was that they would speak out on issues that matter, but also that they will implement a new writing style. There's not really much more said about that. When they've done this in the past, it's been the distinction between should and must, so that they're not confusing people about what's a legal requirement and what's recommended. But I do think there's more around that with the communication style and how they write to trustees often as well, and whether they're understood in the way that they express themselves. Charles, I don't know whether you have any thoughts on that. Yeah,
I think certainly under the new chairmanship, I think there has been a definite shift in emphasis of the Commission. And I very much hope that the noises that are coming out will be fulfilled in the respect that they are going to use their voice more positively. I mean, I raised, from our last charity chats with him about HMRC's review of the taxation bit of it, and yes, they were aware of it. And I just said to him that, it did feel like reading a script from Yes Minister, where you ask a question from Humphrey that you're going to get a predictable answer out of it. And I just said the one question they didn't answer is actually how big a problem this was. And so it did slightly feel like a sledgehammer cracking a nut. Now, obviously, he made no promises that they would go back, but I would be very disappointed if they didn't go back and say something about that on a bureaucracy. I think the other thing we should also just be aware of, and it's a useless piece of information I have in my head, is that the amount of money it cost to run the Commission in 2007-8 was about 33 million. If you had index linked that would be 53 million. Do you know what their budget is at the moment? I'm sure you do.
I don't.
34 million?
30 million.
Oh.
So they've had effectively a 40% cut in the cost of being able to regulate. Now, I accept that some of it will have, technology will have helped and everything else, but that was 2007-8, I think, was sort of one of the times when they were criticised as it was 2003, wasn't it? But anyway, it just shows you that they've been under pressure from a cost basis. And I think fundamentally, I think they do a good job, but I think it would be, I think, as James says, I think they are in a unique position where they have a very powerful voice of which they could use to a much more positive effect.
And that's actually the interesting point about I think on those priorities, that's probably the big difference, that third one. Of course, they've been regulated, fine. They have been regulating. They have been supporting and intervening, absolutely. The changing how they potentially support or otherwise the sector is the interesting point, because they're going to have to do it, as you say, Charles, with no more money, it seems. So that will be interesting to see how they actually make that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it'd be really interesting to see that when they do it as a one-year business plan, because then we should see that quickly, shouldn't we? We should see the impact of that, and it started, and we'll see that difference. I think it'll be possibly a theme that comes up again, whether we see this new writing style, whether we see the guidance or the advisory notes from the Commission being written in a slightly different way, perhaps. But hopefully more positivity. I think we try and give more of a positive reflection on what we see in our professional lives, but I do wonder if that's not coming across generally in various articles and headlines that we see. Any final thoughts, James, Charles, or are you happy?
None from me.
Happy?
Well, I think fundamentally happy. Sun is shining.
Yes, good stuff. Well, it'd be great, I think, just to hear, for those that listen to this session, whether you've got any thoughts, whether you agree, disagree, just any observations at all would be nice to have that debate and see what you think of this freestyling format for today's session, and we'll see whether we repeat that going forward. But thank you for joining us and hope to see you at the next session.